Think about the last time you read, like a screenplay, or even just a raw transcript of a movie.
Oh yeah, just the text. No video, no audio.
Exactly. You're reading along, line by line, and you know exactly what the characters are saying to each other. The dialogue is all there on the page. But because it is just a raw transcript, you are completely blind to the visual language of the film.
Right, you're missing the whole picture, literally.
Yeah, you have absolutely no idea when the director decided to, push the camera in for this intense, dramatic close-up on a character's tear-filled eyes.
Or when they panned way out.
Right. Panned out to show some massive, chaotic city in the background to make the characters look isolated. You have the raw words, but you're missing the visual cues. The cues that tell you how to feel, where to look, and, well, what actually matters in the emotional hierarchy of the scene.
Which means you might be getting the literal content, but
Yeah.
you are completely missing the perspective. I mean, the emotion, the intended focus, the subtext, all of that is lost if you don't have access to those director's cues. You're just processing a flat, uninflected sequence of events.
And that flatness is exactly what we were tackling today. Because if you read ancient texts, specifically the foundational texts of the biblical narrative, in modern English translations, you are often reading a flat transcript.
Very flat.
Yeah. But today, we're going on a deep dive to discover the hidden director's cues within an ancient manuscript.
Yeah.
We're unpacking this genuinely fascinating linguistic paper. It's titled The Linguistic Architecture of Revelation, a discourse analysis of quotative frames in the 7 Johannine sign narratives.
Yeah, it is a very dense academic title, I know. But the implications of this research are incredibly profound for anyone interested in literature, theology, or even just ancient history.
For sure. So our mission today is to look at the Gospel of John. Specifically, we're focusing on the miraculous events recorded in the first half of the book, which is often called the Book of Signs.
Right.
We're going to look at the source material we've gathered to understand how the author uses 2 concepts, verbal aspect and discourse analysis. And we're going to see that this isn't just dry grammatical filler,
No, not at all. It's not a dusty syntax lesson.
Exactly. This is a profound structural tool used to manipulate time and attention. We're going to learn how to decode this ancient source code to see how the author intentionally elevates divine truth over mere physical spectacle. And perhaps most importantly, how understanding this helps us communicate these texts more accurately and powerfully today.
Yeah, and to set the stage properly, we really need to understand how the Gospel of John operates fundamentally. In this specific text, miracles are almost never just called miracles or wonders.
But really, I feel like that's the default word we always use.
Right, but they are explicitly, deliberately referred to as signs, or, in the original Koine Greek, it's semeia. That distinction is actually critical.
Okay, why is that so important?
Because they are not magic tricks meant to dazzle an audience or simply prove that Jesus has supernatural power. They are revelatory events. They're designed on a deep structural level to point beyond themselves and demand a response from the people witnessing them, and by extension from you, the reader.
So they're pointing to something bigger.
Exactly. But the secret to actually understanding these signs, to locating the exact theological peak of what is happening in the narrative, lies in something that almost every single modern reader completely overlooks.
And that is?
Quotative frames.
Okay, let's establish our terms right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Because to understand the camera angles of this ancient text, we first need to identify the literal lens that the author is using. You're saying that lens is the quotative frame.
Yes, the quotative frame.
Which, I mean, is not a phrase most of us use on a daily basis. What exactly is this mechanism?
I know, it sounds like high-level linguistic jargon. But a quotative frame is actually one of the most common structural elements in human language. It is simply the introductory tag that comes immediately before reported speech.
Like he said, she said?
Precisely. When you are reading any work of fiction or nonfiction, it is the phrase he said, she replied, they asked, or he answered. It is literally just the linguistic scaffolding that holds the quote.
So it's just the plumbing of the sentence. Because in modern English literature, when I read a dialogue-heavy scene, my brain doesn't even really register the words he said anymore.
Like just gloss right over them?
Yeah, I just skip right over them to get to the actual dialogue. It's like the little speech bowl tale in a comic book. It doesn't have any inherent meaning. It just points to the character who's currently talking.
And that is precisely how we are trained to read in modern English. It is mostly invisible grammatical plumbing. We filter it out. But what this research paper demonstrates so compellingly is that in the Koine Greek of the Gospel of John, these frames are anything but invisible.
They actually matter.
They are highly calculated strategic choices.
It makes me think of how we use formatting in modern digital communication. Like, if I send you an email or a text message, the literal words I type are the content.
Right.
But if I decide to put a specific word in bold or italics, or if I suddenly type an entire phrase in all cap yes, I am giving you a deliberate secondary signal. I'm telling you exactly how to hear my voice in your head.
Yes, you're forcing a specific emphasis.
Right. So what you're saying is that in this ancient Greek text, the equivalent of he said isn't just a neutral speech bubble. It is the author's bolding, italics, and all caps.
That is a brilliant framework for understanding it. The author is using these introductory verbs as deliberate textual signals to guide your attention. And the data bears this out in a really striking, mathematically verifiable way.
Oh, they actually counted them.
Yeah, the researchers did a quantitative breakdown of the Greek text, looking specifically at Table 1 from our source material. Across the 7 distinct sign narratives in the Gospel of John, they found a very distinct hierarchy of the verbs used to say he said or they said.
Let's lay out those numbers because this is where the hidden architecture starts to become visible.
Okay, so at the very top of the hierarchy, used 23 times in these specific miracle narratives, is the Greek word legai. This translates literally to he says or she says.
In the present tense.
Yes, in the present tense. Specifically what grammarians call the historical present tense. And its specific narrative function, according to the discourse analysis, is to foreground the primary revelatory dialogue.
Wait, 23 times the author actively chooses the present tense, he says, specifically when they want to pull the dialogue right to the front of the stage.
Yes. Next down the list, used 17 times, is "ipen." This is in the aorist tense, which roughly translates to the simple past tense, he said.
Okay, so just normal past tense.
Right. This is the standard baseline way to advance a speech narrative. It just moves the plot along efficiently. Then further down, used 10 times, we have elegon. This is the imperfect tense, meaning they were saying.
You were saying, so it's like an ongoing thing.
Yeah, exactly. The author uses this tense specifically for backgrounding. It's used to represent ongoing controversy, the murmuring of a crowd, the background static of the scene. And finally, also used 10 times, is apekrith.
And what does that one do?
It's an aorist word, meaning he answered, which functions mostly as a formalized structural response formula.
So we have 23 present tense verbs, 17 simple past tense, and 10 imperfect past tense. If you're listening to this, you might be wondering why we are counting ancient Greek verbs, right?
It sounds a bit pedantic at first glance.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why should you care that the author used a present tense word slightly more often than a past tense word? What is the actual payload of this data?
The payload is that it changes the entire theological focal point of the stories. The data reveals that in these highly dramatic, miraculous narratives, water turning to wine, a paralyzed man walking, a dead man coming out of a tomb, the spoken word of Jesus actually carries more structural weight than the physical miracle itself. Yeah, the miracle is just the vehicle. The subsequent dialogue, the revelation of who he is the actual destination. And the quotative frame, that little introductory tag we talked about, is the gatekeeper.
The bolding and italics.
Exactly. It is the textual mechanism that tells you, the reader, exactly which spoken word in the scene is the absolute theological center of the story.
Okay, I love where this is going. But I have to put on my middle school English teacher hat for a second and push back on this premise.
Go for it.
Because if I handed in a short story where I was writing about something that happened yesterday, and I wrote, John walked into the store, he looked at the cashier, and he says, my teacher would cover that page in red ink.
Oh, absolutely. They'd say you're mixing tenses.
Right. If a story happened in the past, which these biblical narratives obviously did, shouldn't all the he says just be in the past tense? Isn't it just inherently bad grammar to be telling a historical story and then suddenly switch to he says right in the middle of a past tense sentence?
It is a completely valid question, and you are absolutely right. For a very long time, many grammarians and biblical scholars actually did think it was just a stylistic quirk.
Like they were just bad writers.
Basically, they thought it was a mark of less sophisticated, street-level Koine Greek, or maybe just the result of messy editing over time. But this raises a fundamental question about how ancient Greek actually functions compared to modern English.
Because they don't work the same way.
Not at all. English is a heavily time-based language. We obsess over the timeline past, present, future, but Greek operates differently. And this is where a linguistic framework developed by a scholar named Constantine Campbell completely revolutionized how we read these texts.
Okay, what did Campbell propose?
He proposed a model of discourse grounding. In his model, these tense shifts are not bad grammar at all. They are highly sophisticated manipulations of what linguists call verbal aspect.
Verbal aspect. Okay, we need to translate that for those of us who don't have PhDs in ancient linguistics. If English is obsessed with time, what is verbal aspect obsessed with?
Think of verbal aspect not as a measure of time, but as the author's chosen spatial perspective on the action. It's not just about when an action happened on a calendar. It's about how the author wants you, the reader, to view the action in your mind's eye.
Spatial perspective. Okay.
Okay. Campbell breaks it down into two main categories. In this context, perfective aspect and imperfective aspect.
Let's break those down. Starting with the perfective aspect. What is that?
The perfective aspect is associated with the aorist tense. These are words like "eipen," he said, and "apocryph," he answered. The perfective aspect provides what we call a summary view.
A summary view. So looking at it from a distance.
Exactly. The author is looking at the action from the outside, from a distance, viewing it as a completed whole.
Like a helicopter shot in a movie.
I like that, yes.
You're flying high above the city, you look down, and you see a car drive from point A to point B. It's a complete action. You see the start of the journey and the end of the journey all at once in a single sweeping shot.
Right, it's efficient.
Yeah, it advances the plot quickly without getting bogged down in the details of the dashboard or the driver's face.
The helicopter shot is the perfect analogy. It moves the narrative forward rapidly. The aorist says, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. But then we have the imperfective aspect, and this is where the linguistic architecture gets highly strategic.
So what's the imperfective aspect?
The imperfective aspect is used for actions that are viewed from the inside as an unfolding, ongoing process. The author uses two different tenses to achieve this inside view, the historical present and the imperfect.
Let's look at the historical present first, because according to our data table, that was the #1 most used frame, clocking in at 23 uses. Words like lige, he says. If the perfective aspect is the helicopter shot, what is the historical present doing?
The historical present creates what Campbell calls proximity. It is a powerful foregrounding tool. When the author switches from the past tense to the present tense, right in the middle of a historical narrative, they are effectively dropping the camera right into the room. They are reaching out, grabbing the reader, and pulling them into the immediate space of the characters.
You know, I feel like we actually still do this in conversational English, even if we don't realize it.
How so?
Think about when you're at a coffee shop and a friend is telling you a crazy story that happened to them last week. They almost always start in the past tense to set the scene. Right.
Sure.
Like, they'll say, so I walked into the grocery store and I was looking for apples, and then this guy bumped into my cart. All past tense, moving the plot along.
Right, doing the summary view.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then, right when they get to the absolute climax of the story, they instinctively switch to the present tense. And then this guy, he turns around and he looks right at me and he says,
Yes, exactly. Your friend didn't suddenly forget the rules of English grammar. They intuitively use the historical present to create a dramatic zoom in. They want you to feel the adrenaline and the immediacy of that exact moment.
That makes so much sense.
In the Greek text of John, the historical present functions the exact same way, but with incredible theological precision. It is the textual equivalent of a sudden, dramatic zoom in on the speaker's face. It elevates that specific piece of dialogue above the surrounding physical actions.
That completely changes how you read a page of text. You literally see the camera moving in your head. So what about the other imperfective tense? The imperfect tense, words like elegon, meaning they were saying. How does that view the action from the inside?
Well, the imperfect tense also views the action from the inside, but instead of foregrounding and zooming in, it is used for grounding or backgrounding. It represents ongoing, incomplete action.
Like the murmur of a crowd.
Exactly. If the historical present is the sharp 4K focus on the main character's face, the imperfect is the blurry background. It's the extras in the scene murmuring to each other. The author uses it to create context and atmosphere, but purposefully keeps it grammatically distinct so that the main action isn't overshadowed by the background noise.
So if the aorist is the fast-paced helicopter shot, and the historical present is the intense, dramatic zoom-in, the imperfect tense is basically the adult voices in a Charlie Brown cartoon.
The adult voices in Charlie Brown, that is brilliant.
It's just that muffled wah-wah-wah in the background. It's happening, you know it's there, but the director is explicitly telling you, do not pay attention to this, it is not the point.
That is a phenomenal way to describe it. The grammar is actively telling you what to ignore and what to focus on.
Okay, so We have a complete, highly sophisticated linguistic toolkit here. We have the data, we have the theory of verbal aspect. Let's take this toolkit and actually go to the movies.
Let's do it.
Let's do a cinematic tour of the 7 signs in the Gospel of John and see how this discourse analysis radically deepens our understanding of the actual stories. But instead of just walking through them chronologically, chapter by chapter like a textbook, let's group them by the type of camera movement the author employs.
I like that approach.
Let's start with the scenes that utilize those intense, intimate zoom-ins, the historical presence. So that's sign 1, the wedding at Cana, and sign 7, the raising of Lazarus.
Looking at those two narratives together is incredibly revealing because they act as the bookends to the entire book of signs.
The first and the last.
Right. In the inaugural sign at Cana in John chapter 2, the narrative relies incredibly heavily on the historical present. The Greek word lege, he says, or she says, dominates the text. In verse 3, when the wine runs out, the text says, the mother of Jesus says to him. And then in verse 4, Jesus responds, Jesus says to her.
Wait, so the camera isn't zooming in on the actual miracle. It's not focusing on the molecular transformation of water into high-quality wine.
No, it's not.
It's zooming in entirely on a quiet conversation between a mother and her son in the middle of a crowded party.
That is the beautiful, subversive part of the linguistic architecture. The physical transformation of the water is almost an afterthought in the grammatical structure. Yeah. By using the historical present back and forth between Jesus and Mary, the author creates an immediate, vivid intimacy. It signals to the reader that this dialogue, specifically Jesus' seemingly cryptic response about his hour not yet having come, is actually the interpretive key to the entire sign.
So the miracle is secondary.
Exactly. The miracle of the wine is secondary to the revelation of his divine timeline and his ultimate purpose.
Man, that immediately reframes the entire story. It's not just a neat party trick to save a family from social embarrassment. The grammar forces you to see it as a deeply intimate, highly foregrounded conversation about his impending death and glorification at his hour.
And we see this exact same intimate zoom-in technique at the very end of the Book of Signs in John 11 with the raising of Lazarus.
Set the scene for us there.
Well, the raising of Lazarus is the revelatory climax of this half of the gospel. A man has been dead in a tomb for 4 days. The stakes could not be higher. And yet, amidst the weeping crowds and the profound grief, the author pulls out all the stops to make sure the reader focuses on the dialogue, not just the impending reanimation of a corpse.
That's fascinating.
The narrative is framed by incredibly intimate historical presence during Jesus' conversations with Lazarus' sisters, Martha and Mary.
Like in verse 21, right? Martha comes out to meet him, and the text reads, Jesus says to her.
And it is in that precise, grammatically foregrounded dialogue that Jesus delivers the most critical theological statement of the entire narrative. I am the resurrection and the life.
Oh, wow.
The grammatical structure demands that the reader focus on that I am declaration above all else. The physical raising of Lazarus is merely the physical proof of the spoken reality.
That makes so much sense.
And then at the very end of the scene, when Jesus stands before the tomb and commands Lazarus to come out, and then commands the stunned crowd to unbind him, the text again uses the historical present. Jesus says to them, the spoken command is what releases the dead man. The word is paramount.
Okay, so that is the intimate zoom in. Let's shift gears and look at the opposite end of the spectrum. Let's look at the scenes categorized by rapid action and chaotic background noise.
See action movies.
Right. Let's look at sign 2, the cleansing of the temple, and sign 6, the healing of the man born blind. What happens to our camera angles when the setting becomes hostile?
It's a fantastic contrast. In the temple cleansing in John 2, where Jesus makes a whip of cords, flips the tables of the money changers, and drives out the livestock, the historical present almost completely vanishes.
It's just gone.
Almost entirely. The narrative shifts entirely to aorist indicatives.
The helicopter shots. The simple past tense.
Precisely. We see words like epiklazon, they answered, and ipan, they said. There are no slow, dramatic, intimate zoom-ins here. The aorist provides a fast-paced, summary view of the action.
It's basically an action sequence. It's like a Bourne Identity or a John Wick scene translated into ancient text.
That's exactly how it functions grammatically.
Because the sensory details in that scene are wild, right? You've got the cracking of the whip, the coins scattering across the stone floor, the bleating of the sheep, people yelling. But the author doesn't slow down to give us a tight close-up on anyone's face.
The grammar perfectly matches the chaos and the velocity of the scene. The aorist keeps the focus entirely on the rapid sequence of physical and verbal challenges. The Jewish leaders challenge him with a demand for a sign. He fires back instantly with a cryptic statement about destroying the temple and razing it in 3 days.
Just rapid fire.
Very breathless pacing, and the grammar enforces that speed.
And we see a different kind of chaos in sign 6, the healing of the man born blind, in John chapter 9. If the temple was an action sequence, this story reads more like a chaotic courtroom drama.
That narrative is essentially a multi-stage judicial investigation. Jesus heals a man who has been blind since birth by making mud with his saliva, putting it on his eyes, and telling him to wash in a pool.
And then the interrogation starts.
Oh, yes. After the healing, the man is subjected to a relentless series of intense interrogations, first by his confused neighbors, and then by the highly skeptical religious authorities. And because there is so much back and forth dialogue, there are an enormous number of quotative frames. It's the highest density of frames in all the signs.
And this is where the Charlie Brown adult voice really comes into play, isn't it?
It is. What's fascinating here is how the author uses the contrast between the tenses to mirror the central theological theme of the story, which is the progression from spiritual blindness to spiritual sight.
Oh, the grammar mirrors the sight.
Exactly. Throughout the interrogations, the crowd and the neighbors are deeply confused and arguing among themselves. They're debating whether it's really the same man, how he was healed, and who exactly did it. And the text repeatedly frames their dialogue with the imperfect tense.
The elegon, they were saying.
Yes, elegon.
It's the blurry background noise. The text is literally muffling their voices.
Yes. But amidst all that chaotic, imperfect background noise, the formerly blind man is slowly, progressively realizing who Jesus actually is. His spiritual sight is clearing up step by step, perfectly mirroring his new physical sight.
And so cool.
And as his confessions become clearer and bolder, the author shifts the frames, introducing his speech into the present and historical present.
So zooming in on him.
Exactly. When he first confesses ignorance about where Jesus is, the text uses lege, he says. And finally, when he makes his ultimate defiant confession of faith before the hostile authorities, the text frames it sharply, he said.
That is just stunning literary craftsmanship. The grammar literally mirrors the man's progression of spiritual sight. He rises out of the blurry, confusing, imperfect background noise of the murmuring crowd, and his faith is structurally foregrounded in the sharp focus of the text.
The linguistic architecture reinforces the narrative arc in a way that is entirely invisible in English, but glaringly obvious if you know how to read the Greek cues.
Let's look at one more thematic grouping. Let's look at the moments of stark disconnect between the physical reality and the spiritual reality. Signs 3 and 4, the healing of the official son in John 4, and the healing at the Bethesda pool in John 5.
Both of these narratives use a hybrid approach that demonstrates the incredible precision of the author. They start by establishing the setting using the aorist, that generalizing past tense.
The helicopter shot again.
Right. For instance, in John 4, a royal official comes to Jesus and begs him to travel to Capernaum to heal his dying son. The narrator sets the scene, Jesus said. It's just advancing the plot at a normal narrative speed. But then we hit the absolute peak of the story.
This is where we need to slow down and really look at the mechanics of the sentence, because this is where the theology happens.
Right at the climax of the narrative, the author suddenly shifts gears. The text reads, Jesus says to him, "Go, your son lives."
The sudden zoom in.
Yes, Leger.
And what's wild here is that Jesus doesn't go to the boy. He doesn't touch him. He just speaks the word, and the healing happens miles away simultaneously. The grammar highlights that the spoken word is the healing mechanism.
Exactly. And the same structural mechanism happens at the Bethesda pool in John 5. You have a man who has been paralyzed lying by this pool for 38 years. Jesus approaches him, and the text uses the historical present. He says to him, and the command is simply, get up, take up your bed, and walk.
Let's actually pause and look at John 5.8, because I want to understand how these words lock together. The healing happens instantly, based solely on that spoken command. But the aftermath of that healing is where the discourse analysis reveals something incredibly subversive about the social dynamics of the scene.
Yes, it really is subversive. Right after this incredible foregrounded healing command, the religious authorities, the Pharisees, and the Jewish leaders show up. And they are incensed because Jesus performed this healing and told the man to carry his mat on the Sabbath day.
Right. They're furious about the rules.
They start interrogating the man and arguing about the legality of what just happened. But look at the verb the author chooses to introduce the dialogue of these powerful religious leaders. than the Jews were saying.
Wait, the imperfect tense, the blurry background noise.
Yes, Elegon again.
That completely reframes the Pharisees. We usually read them in these stories as these terrifying, imposing villains who command the room. But grammatically, John is turning them into the Charlie Brown adult voice.
He really is.
They are just muffled, irrelevant background static compared to the authoritative word of Jesus. That is almost a subtle textual mockery of their authority.
It is a profound subversion of social hierarchy through grammar. By using the imperfect tense here, the author is grammatically blurring out the complaining authorities. The narrative focus remains sharply locked on Jesus' life-giving word, represented by the historical present. The legalistic objections of the religious leaders are structurally relegated to background static. They simply don't get to share the main stage with the logos.
That is unbelievable. The camera is locked onto the healed man walking away, and the authorities are just out-of-focus figures in the background shouting about Sabbath laws.
Yeah.
But their audio track is turned way down. The grammar literally tells you whose words possess true power.
And we see a similar kind of disconnect in sign 5, the feeding of the 5,000 in John 6.
Now, this is a massive scene. Huge crowds, thousands of people, a miraculous multiplication of bread and fish. What is the camera focusing on amidst all that physical spectacle?
You might expect the linguistic focus to be on the sheer scale of the miracle, the logistical impossibility of feeding thousands of people with a boy's lunch. But again, the discourse analysis subverts our expectations. The historical presence in this narrative cluster around a very specific, quiet, interactive moment before the miracle even happens. They center entirely on Jesus testing one of his disciples, Philip.
The text says, he says to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" And then the response of another disciple, Andrew, is also framed in the historical present. One of his disciples says to him,
The author zooms in on the dialogue where Jesus is pushing his followers to see past their physical, economic limitations. The multiplication of the loaves, the massive crowd-pleasing miracle, is merely the physical manifestation of the theological lesson that was established in the foregrounded, intimate dialogue.
Oh, so the conversation was the main event.
Yes. The testing of the disciples' faith isn't a minor prologue to the main event. The grammar proves it is the central revelatory purpose of the sign.
Okay, so we have spent a lot of time talking about how the main verbs, the aorists, the imperfects, the historical presence act as the director's camera, manipulating time, focus, and hierarchy. But as we move out of the tour of the signs, our research outlines another deeply fascinating layer to this linguistic architecture.
Right, there's another piece to the puzzle.
Because scenes aren't just characters standing still in a void talking at each other. They are walking on dusty roads, they are running, they are fighting, they are sitting by wells. How does the author tie this high spiritual dialogue to the gritty physical dirt of first-century Judea?
That brings us to a strict syntactic pattern that the researchers identified, focusing on a different type of word entirely, the participle. We've been looking at finite verbs that have a subject and a tense, like he says or they said. But there is another type of word frequently used in Greek syntax. In English, these are the ing words, saying, replying, answering.
The Greek words like legantes or legusa.
Exactly. What the data reveals is that across all 7 signs, participles are almost never used alone to frame a quote.
Right, never.
Almost never. They are never the main verb of the sentence. They are always strictly syntactically dependent on a finite verb of action.
Walk us through the mechanics of that. What does that mean practically when you are reading a sentence?
It means you won't find a sentence in these narratives that just reads, and Jesus saying, "Come here." The participle saying always piggybacks on a verb of physical movement or action in the physical world. So the structure is always something like, and they came to him saying, or he met them on the road saying.
Okay, so the text is doing 2 completely different things simultaneously. It's not just walking and chewing gum, because those are 2 independent actions. It feels more like a Trojan horse mechanism.
Trojan horse! I like that. Expand on that.
Well, the finite verb, the physical action of walking to the well or coming to the tomb or crossing the sea, is the wooden horse. It's the material action that moves the story forward in physical space and time. But hidden inside that physical movement, inextricably attached to it, is the participle, the saying, which delivers the actual spiritual payload of the dialogue.
Trojan horse is an excellent mechanical metaphor for this grammar. In linguistics, this specific structure is often called an attendant circumstance. The text has a main, finite verb that describes a material process, a physical action in the real world. That is your wooden horse. But seamlessly attached to that physical action is the participle of speech. That introduces the verbal process of revelation.
So why does this matter? Why does the author bother tethering the spiritual speech to the physical action so strictly? Why not just separate them?
Because it reflects the core theology of the entire gospel. Remember how the Gospel of John begins, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us?
Ah,
The author is deeply foundationally invested in the idea of the incarnation. The spiritual is not disconnected from the physical. The divine doesn't just float in some ethereal, disconnected realm. By strictly linking the revelatory dialogue, the participle, to the gritty physical movement of the characters, the finite verb, the author grounds the divine truth firmly in physical reality.
The revelation happens while people are sweating, walking down dusty roads, meeting by wells, and standing in front of decaying tombs.
Precisely. The syntax itself preaches the theology of the incarnation. The grammatical structure insists that the profound spiritual truths of God are delivered inextricably bound to the mundane physical realities of human existence.
I love that. The grammar itself is an apologetic for the incarnation. Okay, we have dug incredibly deep into the linguistic architecture today. We've talked about verbal aspect, spatial perspective versus time, perfective and imperfective aspects, the power of the historical present to zoom in, the subversion of the imperfect tense to muffle the Pharisees, and the Trojan horse mechanism of attendant circumstance participles.
It's a lot of linguistics.
It is. But now we have to ask the ultimate question. We've dissected the grammar, but so what? How does this highly technical analysis of ancient Koine Greek actually help us understand and communicate the core message of these passages more accurately and powerfully in our own lives today?
If we synthesize all of this data and connect it to the bigger picture, the first and most critical takeaway is recognizing the absolute undeniable authority of the spoken word in these texts. Time and time again, across all 7 signs, we saw the author actively foregrounding Jesus' speech using the historical present. The text literally grammatically elevates the saying above the doing.
Which fundamentally challenges how we usually teach and talk about these stories, because we usually focus on the spectacle.
We do, but the consistent grammatical focus emphasizes that Jesus' word is the effective agent of the sign. The healing of the official son happens solely through a spoken word across a distance. Lazarus is raised by a spoken command.
Right.
To communicate these texts accurately today, we have to recognize that the physical spectacle of the miracle is secondary. If we tell the story of the feeding of the 5,000 and we only focus on the miraculous math of the fish and loaves multiplying, we've entirely missed the grammatical and theological point of the text. We must focus on the dialogue, the authoritative command, the challenging question posed to Philip.
That makes total sense, and it changes how I view the events themselves. These aren't just static historical anomalies. They aren't just divine magic shows meant to prove how powerful Jesus was to a passive audience.
What are they, then, based on this linguistic framework?
Based on the grammatical shifts, the constant movement from the narrative action to the dialogic interactive moments, they are revelatory encounters. The whole goal of the sign, proven by the grammar, is the response of the people involved.
Exactly.
The text zooms in on the dialogue because the dialogue demands a reaction from the listener. It either generates belief, as we saw in the beautiful progression of the man born blind, or it exposes spiritual blindness, as we saw with the muffled religious authorities in the background at Bethesda. The physical sign is just the catalyst. The encounter with the word is the actual point.
That is a profound insight, and it's heavily backed up by another linguistic pattern the researchers highlighted in the source material. It's the concept of progressive or deferred revelation.
Unpack that for us. How does the grammar show deferred understanding?
In several of these narratives, specifically sign 2, the temple cleansing, and sign 6, the healing of the blind man, there is strategic repeated use of the Greek word emnesthezin, which translates to "they remembered."
Right. Jesus will say something deeply cryptic like, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And in the moment, everyone is totally confused. The authorities think he's talking about the literal stone building. Even the disciples don't understand it. It's only later, after the resurrection, that they remember what he said and finally put the pieces together.
Exactly. The full theological significance of these signs is frequently deferred to a post-resurrection insight. The people in the story rarely understand the deep truth in real time.
Which is pretty relatable.
Very relatable. But the quotative frames, specifically those sharp, foregrounded historical presents, serve as textual anchors. They highlight and preserve the crucial dialogue so that later the disciples and the reader can look back and say, "Oh, that is what he meant." The frames bridge the gap between the initial misunderstanding and the muddy reality of the moment, and the final, clear recognition of the truth later on.
The frames are planting the seeds that will bloom later. They are structurally saying to you, the reader, you probably don't understand this now, but pay attention. Remember exactly what was said right here, because it is the key to everything.
Beautifully put.
That is actually an incredible comfort when you think about it. It means that misunderstanding or confusion in the moment isn't necessarily a failure. It's often just a built-in part of the process of progressive revelation.
The author is gently guiding you through that progression, ensuring that even if the physical events of the narrative are overwhelming or confusing, the central anchoring truth of the spoken word is marked, highlighted, and preserved for you to return to when you are ready to understand it.
Let's bring this all together. What an incredibly dense and rewarding journey we've been on today. We started with something that seemed utterly mundane, simple introductory verbs, the ancient equivalent of a text message speech bubble. He said, she replied. And from that microscopic starting point, we discovered a masterfully crafted, highly intentional linguistic architecture.
It forces you to completely reevaluate the sophistication of ancient authors. They were doing things with syntax that modern cinematic directors do with million-dollar camera rigs.
They really were. We saw how the perfective aspect, the aorist tense, acts as the narrative helicopter shot, advancing the plot rapidly as a completed whole, like in the chaos of the temple cleansing. We saw how the imperfect tense acts as the blurry, muffled background noise, intentionally keeping the murmuring crowds and the legalistic controversies of the Pharisees from stealing the spotlight.
And most importantly,
we saw how the historical present tense acts as the director's sudden, dramatic close-up, zooming in past the physical spectacle of the miracles directly onto the logos, the divine authoritative word.
by elevating the spoken command and the subsequent confessions of faith through these precise grammatical choices, the quotative frames fulfill the stated purpose of the gospel itself. That you may believe. The author isn't just recounting history, they are structurally engineering an encounter for the reader.
And understanding the source code completely changes how you read these ancient texts. It pulls you out of the seat of a passive observer watching a magic trick from a distance and forces you to become an active participant in a revelatory encounter. The grammar itself is grabbing you by the collar, telling you exactly where to look and exactly what to listen to.
The intention behind the text is undeniable once you know how to look for the patterns. It demands engagement.
So we want to leave you with a final, lingering idea to chew on as you go about your week. The writer of this ancient text actively, masterfully manipulated time, tense, and perspective to highlight the most crucial life-changing truths in their narrative. They used their language to force the reader to look exactly where they wanted them to look.
It makes you reflect on how we use language to shape reality today. As you interact with your colleagues, your family, or even just when you are telling a story to a friend over coffee, what is the historical present of your own narrative?
Amidst all the chaotic, imperfect background noise and the rapid-fire, perfective events of your daily life, what is the core truth you are actively zooming in on and foregrounding to the world?